So, hi, welcome to this episode of History Hunters. It's the holiday season, so we haven't been able to get out as much as we normally have been, and the weather is really not that cooperative. So, I thought I would do this episode kind of dovetail with the Christmas holiday by visiting some antique stores in my area to highlight some of the interesting things that I can find relating to the past. So, hopefully, you'll enjoy this one. So what I thought I would do is start out right here at Treasure Hunters. It's a very interesting antique store here in Turlock. Get it? Treasure Hunters, History Hunters. Good place to start, huh?
Elvis Presley has been gone since 1977, but he remains popular and collectible even to this day. Elliott Handler created Hot Wheels in 1968, and they were produced by Mattel, the primary competitor of Matchbox. That is, until Mattel purchased Matchbox, owner of Tyco Toys, in 1997. Children began playing with Lincoln Logs beginning in 1916. The toy was created by John Lloyd Wright, son of the well-known architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Lincoln Logs were inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame in 1999. This plastic rail car is labeled B&O Railroad. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was the first common carrier railroad and the oldest railroad in the United States. It operated as B&O Railroad from 1830 until 1987 when it merged into the Chessie system. Its lines today are controlled by CSX Transportation. This is obviously a more modern 10 for log cabin syrup, which was discovered in 1887 by grower Patrick Towle, who initially formulated it as a way to dispose of leftover corn syrup. The name was his way of honoring Abraham Lincoln, who was, of course, raised in a log cabin. Horlick's Original Malted Milk is a British sweet malted milk hot drink powder developed by James and William Horlick. First sold as Horlick's infant and invalid's food, in the early 20th century it was sold as a powdered meal replacement drink mix. Arctic explorer Ernest de Koven Leffingwell relied on cases of Horlicks to sustain him during his stays on Flaxman Island in Alaska around 1910. Anyone care to buy a dismembered Pinocchio head? While Disney made him a household name in 1940, he was a story created in 1883 by Italian author Carlo Collodi. Raggedy Ann is a children's book character created by writer Johnny Gruelle. Raggedy Ann first appeared as a doll in 1915. A 1920 sequel, Raggedy Andy Stories, introduced her brother, Raggedy Andy. Some families' photos ended up in this antique store, but I had to do a double take because the guy in overalls could have been my great-grandfather. See what I mean? This is a picture of him with my great-grandmother. It's certainly not uncommon to see American antique stores selling items like this postal cover celebrating the royal wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana. The July 29, 1981 wedding was a joyous occasion, but after producing 2 children, the couple had a messy separation in 1992 and divorced in 1996. Sadly, Diana was killed in a car crash the following year. The sight of these RCA tubes triggered me. While these may be tubes from a radio, televisions back in the 1960s also had them. Often our set would go out and Dad would have to open up the back of the set, remove the tubes, and haul them down to the tube tester inside of Thrifty's drugstore. It would have been a complete pain if it wasn't for us tagging along to get an ice cream. This spittoon made me think of my great-grandfather who dipped snuff and spit into one of these at his feet. Actually, I think he used the poor man's version, a tobacco can, and on more than one occasion we accidentally tipped over that nasty can.
Such cool stuff in here. Just too much stuff in here.
I may have had this Rudolph book. It's a 1967 reprint of the 1939 book. Rudolph was created by Robert L. May in 1939 after Montgomery Ward wanted to create its own children's coloring book to save money. Believe it or not, his first picks for the name of the famous reindeer were Rollo and Reginald. Gene Autry, of course, made him really famous when he recorded the 1949 song written by May's brother-in-law, Johnny Marks. Snowflake salted wafers were produced by Pacific Coast Biscuit Company, headquartered in Portland, and formed in 1899. It was the only baking company in the United States to trademark a swastika, and obviously that was before somebody came along and made it a dirty symbol. Perine batteries were produced in the late 1920s and early 1930s and featured a polar bear on their advertisement signs. This, of course, is a recent reproduction. A Zero fan from Bursted Manufacturing. At least this one has a guard because I have an antique fan at home that could probably take off my fingers. So now I want to go into Main Street Antiques. It's one of my favorite antique stores here in Turlock, California. I know the owners personally, and I always enjoy going into these shops to browse and see what they have. The Wizard of Oz blew away American audiences first in 1939, but these nesting dolls are more of a recent creation. Nesting dolls were created in Russia in the 1890s. The Universal Flashlight Company of Washington, D.C. manufactured this chest light hands-free lamp during the World War II era. This 8mm zoom home movie camera was manufactured by Mansfield Industries of Chicago in the late 1950s and into the mid-1960s. It reminded me of the camera which Abraham Zapruder used to film the Kennedy assassination, only his was the Bell & Howell Zoomatic. That famous camera is now in the U.S. National Archives. That Kodak camera guide reminds me of all the money I spent through the years on rolls of film and processing. The Eastman Kodak Company has survived bankruptcy by adapting to changing times, but of course everything is digital today. Dating back to 1957, these shoe molds definitely qualify as antiques. But does anyone use these anymore? Smokey the Bear has been near and dear to my heart since I became obsessed with him as a young boy. He was created in 1944 to get us all thinking about fire safety in our forests. I wonder how many forest fires he actually helped to prevent. The Maxwell Smart action figure wasn't showing, but this is the box for it. A total of 138 episodes of Get Smart ran on TV from 1965 to 1970. I always feel a twinge of sadness when I see old cabinet card photos like these in antique stores, images orphaned from their relatives. How these from a faraway state ended here is anybody's guess. What was this woman's story after she posed for this in Rockford, Illinois? This photo bears witness to how young boys were dressed similar to girls in the Victorian era. I was struck by his hairstyle and his piercing eyes, probably blue. This photo was taken at the Guy Studio in Beloit, Wisconsin. It's now in Turlock, California. Were these two girls sisters? Did they live long? What were their names? God only knows. And who was this woman? What kind of joys and sorrows did she face in life? Chances are, if you're an older man, you probably read the Hardy Boys series. The books came out in 1927 and were published through the 1950s. Through them, we learned how teenage amateur sleuths Frank and Joe Hardy solved mysteries like the disappearing floor and the Flying Express. Like a lot of young kids, I enjoyed comic books growing up, including Casper the Ghost. Harvey Comics, founded in 1941 by Alfred Harvey, produced these. In 1957, Harvey Comics began its own animation production division and produced Casper cartoons and films.
Nothing doing, Casper. I don't want to go to night school. I want to go out and scare.
When Harvey Comics went out of business, it had produced 260 issues of Casper from 1958 to 1989. Remember the days before video games and smartphones overtook the attention of children? In those days, children would actually read books like these: Maximo the Amazing Superman and The Crystal Doom and Dan of the Lazy L. This antique wooden horse on wheels is something I've seen in museums throughout California. Remember the days when you had to write with pens filled with ink like this? This is from the 1950s, Schaefer script writing fluid, in other words, black ink. But this is apparently washable if you got it on your clothes. This $85 hat screams W.C. Fields, doesn't it? Ah yes, my little chickadee. I wonder how many photographs this Brownie Jr. camera took. I certainly think the women dressed more fashionably in the 1930s and 40s than they do today. This lady's hat reminds me of the one that Chevy Chase wore when he was stuck in the attic and watched old home movies in the holiday film classic National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. I thought this was really cool. Bijou Toys of New York issued this 1950s Christmas stocking with Santa's rubber face poking out of it. I'm actually older than this item. It's a Smith Corona Electra 120 typewriter issued in 1965. This vintage Zenith radio still works, but wouldn't it be something if it picked up radio signals from that same era?
I think a person could spend all day in these places and never see it all.
These boxes haven't seen cigars in decades, but bear witness to some big brands like Perfecto Grande, White Owl, and Webster. I think a lot of us students took these to school to store our pens and things like that.
Gosh, I remember these.
The moment that I saw this plaid hat, the image of actor Rex Harrison came to mind. I found a picture of him wearing a similar hat. Bing Crosby also wore one like it in White Christmas. Cowboys and Indians were a big thing in the 1940s and 50s due to movie matinees and cowboy TV shows, so toy manufacturers made cheap Indian headdresses for the boys to play in. I may have even had one. And who could forget child actress Shirley Temple, Hollywood's #1 box office draw as a child actress from 1934 to 1938. She later wrote her autobiography, which was on the shelf, along with a cobalt blue creamer with her image engraved on it. Shirley Temple Black died in 2014. I spied this wooden head of Dopey atop this container, but I'm not sure if they belong together. Disney produced the film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937, and it was a huge hit. Did anyone in my viewing audience ever use one of these antique Western electric hand-crank telephones? This 1913 phone was priced at $249, which wasn't a bad price. Plastic troll dolls first came out in 1956, inspired from trolls in old Scandinavian folklore. They became a fad as good luck charms in the 1960s. They're also known as Dam dolls, named after Danish creator and woodcutter Thomas Dam. You may own one of these small metal busts of a U.S. president, this one of course being George Washington, who died in 1799. Are you aware that Washington likely died because of the medical practice of bloodletting to cure ailments? It's true. The baby Jesus being held by his mother Mary. This ceramic figure fully represents what the Christmas holiday is about.
I think this time of year is probably the best time to go looking in antique stores. It just gives me an excuse because I don't normally go into antique stores. I used to go to them a lot more. But this time of year, looking for gift items, some white elephants, it's a good time to check out things from the past.
The day after Thanksgiving, we visited Jamestown and browsed through the antique store inside the Emporium building, which bears the construction date of 1897. These are fruit box labels, one for the Table Treat brand of Santa Rosa plums and the other for a Camel brand of grapes grown from Placer County. I thought these were interesting, wooden cars and trucks carved of wood. This blonde mannequin looks like she escaped from a 1950s Technicolor film with that dress. Maybe she did. Upstairs on the creaky walkway, I had an overview of some expensive relics from the past. This stuffed bear was mentioned by TV personality Hugh Hauser when he visited the store in 2010.
Back when towns across the country bottled their own soda, this is an example of that. Oakdale, California. This is not for sale, but this is one of the punching bag machines. A Daisy butter churn for $125, firm on that.
Borden's country-style cottage cheese container from decades ago. Borden's brand dates back to 1856. My grandson Wade and I visited the Antiques Etc. store on Washington Street in Sonora, California, the night of the annual Christmas parade, and we checked out some of the neat things in the store. Again, more fashionable women's attire from past generations when women were probably more fashion conscious than today. Hats were definitely in vogue back then. I've also seen pictures of people in Disneyland in the 1950s dressed up in a suit and tie. In 1965, Pillsbury Company introduced the adorable Poppin' Fresh Doughboy as its mascot. He is still being used in advertising today. This is a ceramic Campbell Soup figurine from 1998. Campbell Kids were first used in 1906 as advertising mascots for the Campbell Soup Company. This ceramic figure of a football player must be old because look at the style of that football helmet. To me, he resembled actor Richard Dix. And this is an antique leather Spalding football that he might have used. Roy Rogers was a popular read in the 1940s, and this is his adventure with the Gopher Creek Gunman. Life magazine often celebrates celebrities like Elvis Presley's daughter and wife, Lisa Presley and Priscilla Presley. This edition came out in December 1988, and sadly, Lisa passed away in 2023. At first, I thought this was a soapbox, but Yankee Girl Scrap was a brand of chew tobacco in the 1950s. My grandson Wade tried opening this toy safe, but I showed him how the instructions were usually printed at the bottom, which totally defeats the purpose of security for a safe. Another of the books that children would read in the 1930s included this one, Dick Tracy Returns. Better Little books were published in 1932 by the Whitman Publishing Company of Racine, Wisconsin. This Vanguard Sparta camera came out in the 1960s. It was priced at $39. I doubt if anybody would use it if they bought it. This Sparta camera may resemble a movie camera, but it's a still camera. I can't imagine a child in 2024 playing this album, Songs of America, let alone owning one of these DJ turntables. But I had a similar one as a kid in the 1960s. You may recognize this as a stereoscope viewer popular in the 19th century. It was kind of replaced in 1939 by the Viewmaster. It's hard to believe that we used to navigate ourselves with paper maps like this one dated in 1949. I can't tell you the last time I used a map, but it was probably in the 1990s. Of course, in today's life, we navigate ourselves by GPS devices and smartphones. This is an interesting sign, Haley's MO Mineral Oil Laxative. It must have worked because the company is still around. Here's a whole pile of skeleton keys. I remember my grandmother opened her front door with one of these keys. Because they all looked the same and were pretty simple, I kind of wondered if they would work in other people's locks. We ended our visit that special night with me buying Wade a Santa cap for $15. He was pretty happy to have it. Let me do a little rewind and tell you about earlier in the day when we visited Cover's apple farm outside of Tuolumne and enjoyed riding the kiddie train. My last grandson, Carter, took it all in.
That's going to wrap up this episode of History Hunters. I had fun checking out some of the antiques and learning a little bit more about it in preparing this video. There's just a lot I don't know even as a amateur historian. We want to thank you so much for watching, and Sarah and I wish you a very Merry Christmas. Thank you so much.